Greetings and thanks for joining us again for another biweekly update. My name is Carlos Salinas, and I'm the Regional Director for the U.S. Soybean Export Council in the Americas. A pleasure to be here with you. I've been out for the last few weeks, so I apologize if you have not been receiving this update. These updates are designed for key customers like you and for USEC's internal purposes. I hope the information provided is valuable. Before we get started, and as we always do, we would like to share our membership with you. Within the USEC's membership, we have soybean exporters, soybean processors, seed companies, equipment manufacturers, railroads, surveyors, brokers, among many other important stakeholders and funding sources. And we always like to recognize the support and contribution that we receive from the U.S. soybean farmer. Without that support, this presentation would not be possible. It was very difficult to choose the agenda for today because there are many items that we could discuss. One of them was the impacts of the exchange rate, the new exchange rate set by the Argentine government for the farmers in Argentina, which comes effective this Monday. We'll see what it brings. We have other things going on. We have a WASA report coming up this week as well. But today we will focus on soybean prices, the supply-demand situation, and we'll talk about soybean meal quality and soybean quality as well. So let's go ahead and get started. And when I'm out for a while, I always like to come back and take a look at seasonal soybean prices. I like to see where prices stand versus the past 20 years in relationship to the past 20 years. And in this particular case, the chart I'm about to show you gives you the prices of soybeans over the past 20 years. And so you'll see 20 different lines. But the line that is important is a black line. Is actually on a very high range because we are in a very high price environment. In this particular case, we can say that July soybeans that settled this past Thursday settled at 14.62.5. If I'm not mistaken, this is the second highest soybean price that we've had at this particular point in time. So we have to keep that into context. We remain in a very high price environment. When we look at soybean meal is really no different. July meal settled at 449.70 per short ton. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the third highest soybean meal price over the past 20 years. So in a very high price environment, obviously quality becomes important, nutrition becomes important, soybean meal digestibility. You want to make sure that you maximize all the attributes that your ingredients give you and make sure that nothing goes to waste. So those factors obviously are going to be important to keep in mind. The next chart I'm about to show you compares soybeans, soybean meal, and soybean oil against other grains. And what this chart does is normalizes the price of those commodities at 100% as of January 1. So we'll see a percentage change that has taken place since the beginning of the year. As you can see, we start at 100% here on January 1, and you can see the percentage evolution for every commodity. We see soybean meal with a lot of volatility in between, but really down only 1%. Soybeans down 5%. When you take a look at corn and rice, those are down about 8%. And when we take a look at soybean oil and soft wheat, that's down about 14%. So we can say that really the major contributor on the reduction on soybean prices has been the soybean oil. But anyway, many may be wondering why do we remain in a very high price environment given the large South American crop and everything that's has taken place in South America. Many believe that we should be lower on prices. And I'm not here to advocate one or the other, but I want to share with you an extract that I got from one of our data providers, which is Oil World. Oil World puts together a monthly report, and I want to share with you the report that came on March 24th, where they talk about the current situation. And I'm just taking some excerpts from that report to share with you. The report is certainly a whole lot bigger. But I think the title makes it very interesting, and it says a prospective decline in world soybean crushing by 4 to 5 million metric tons in Jan-June is unprecedented. I think this is mainly driven by the crop reduction in Argentina. And as many of you know, Argentina is the largest soybean meal and soybean oil exporter in the world. So whatever impacts Argentina has a significant impact on the product side and globally. I think you can pause this and read it in more detail. I'm not going to go read the whole paragraph for you, but they say a very complex situation has developed in soybeans and products. But the last sentence, I think, is kind of interesting and worth noting. It says Brazil can only partly compensate for the deficit that has been created on the product side, on soybean meal and soybean oil, which we have to keep in mind. When you dig into the data a little bit more, you can see what the latest crop estimate is for Argentina. Right, Argentina has gone from 41.8 last year to 24 million metric tons, a significant drop. And certainly last year and the previous was already a pretty bad year for Argentina. When you take a look at the imports, what I found surprising is that now we're forecasting Argentina to import 9 million metric tons. They typically import between 4 to 4.5 million metric tons, mainly from Paraguay and in part from Brazil. I would assume that the balance coming in of these imports is going to come from Brazil. Interesting dynamics for sure. And when you take a look at total soybean meal production, we also see a drop in this window, which is actually October through September. So we looked at different windows. We take at the Jan-June, and the chart on the left on the yellow, it's April, March, and over here we're looking at October, September. Nonetheless, I think the conclusion is very similar, and many may argue, well, Carlos, we're going to have the market today has less demand for soybean meal, and I think it's on the contrary. Given the price situation today, the market is trying to ration that demand and via prices, because we have a limited soybean meal supplies globally. So all the other origins outside of Argentina will have to do their share of helping resolve that balance sheet. So let's go to our next subject and talk about soybean meal quality and protein. At USEC, we like to talk about quality, and we like to take a look at beyond protein. While many people look at protein, we like to think that there are other elements which are important, such as the digestibility of that protein, the amino acid of that protein, and other factors in soybean meal that contribute to the calculation, such as its energy content, which is a very important factor, particularly in these high prices. As I said before, it is critical that we optimize the utilization of all the raw ingredients, including soybean meal, and don't let anything go to waste in this type of environment, because we do need to ration. So let's take a look at some of the numbers that we've been able to collect with Evonik, which USEC has contracted to gather some data for us. And we're going to take a look at the soybean meal crude protein and also the standard deviation of that protein, which is also an important factor. And when we talk about standard deviation, I'd like to highlight that, one of my friends that is a buyer, he says, Carlos, I'm going to pay you for the lowest quality within that standard deviation, because I have to assume that everything that you give me, I have to take a safety margin, and I have to assume that I'm going to be getting that a lower quality. While some of it may be better, he certainly takes a look at standard deviation within his calculations. Now, whether it's a highly aggressive safety margin taken or a less aggressive safety margin, that's depends on the user and the type of animals and many other variables, I'm sure. But let's take a look at crude protein, and the comparison is between Argentina, Brazil, and the U.S. And first of all, what I found interesting on the data set that we collected was that protein overall, I think over history has been declining at all origins. In this particular case, we see Brazil going from 48.39 to 47.85, Argentina showing a slight decline, and the U.S. It was, to my surprise, actually had a slight increase on crude protein. Good to see, and hopefully it's a change of trend. But I think all origins have been struggling with the reductions of protein. When we take a look at standard deviation, we know that standard deviation changes as well, and from one crop, I'm sure depending on many factors and the quality of different parts of regions of the countries and so forth. And certainly we see significant shifts. I think 2021 was probably the peak for many origins, including Brazil, the U.S., and almost Argentina. But when we take a look at 2022, we see Argentina and the U.S. with very similar standard deviations on their protein. And when you take a look at Brazil, we have a 1.5 standard deviation on that protein, which is pretty wide. But let's take a look and see what this means. Going back again under the argument that a customer will pay you for the lowest end of the spectrum. In this particular case, when we take a look at Argentina and we have a 46.64 protein with 0.99, and we take 2 standard deviations, which means that out of the whole data set, we're accounting for close to 95% of the samples within that. And the range within those samples with 2 standard deviations, or 95% of those samples, are going to fall between 44.66 and 48.62. And what my friend was trying to allude to is like, Carlos, I'm going to pay you for the 44.66 because that is a low end of the spectrum. That's what I can count on, and that's a safety margin I need. Again, the degree of safety margin that a nutritionist will take, it's going to be maybe 2 standard deviations is aggressive. But again, depending on what type of business you have. When you take a look at Brazil in this particular case, and you do the same calculation where you take the 47.85 and you apply the 2 standard deviations covering close to 95% of the samples taken, that range will go from 44.85 to 50.85, right? That's how scattered those plots are going to be. And when you take a look at the U.S. With 47.07 protein and a 1.09 standard deviation, and once again we apply the 2 standard deviation calculation, where we cover 95% of all those scatter plots or samples, we get a range of 44.89 to 49.25. So if you're going to be conservative, and if you're going to take a conservative approach in your calculation, certainly that standard deviation factor is important. And if you're going to take the lower end of the range, you can see how U.S. soybean meal actually stacks up fairly well due to that lower standard deviation. So again, protein is one factor of measurement. We like to take a look at other factors beyond the protein, such as digestibility, amino acid profile, among many other factors. But I know many of you look at protein, so I thought I share that with you. But let's talk about another factor, which is one of the elements, or one of the variables to measure digestibility of that protein. That's trypsin inhibitors. And I found this information relatively interesting because, as some of you know, trypsin inhibitors are an anti-nutritional factor found in many plants, and I think soybeans are no exception. And I'm learning these from our in-house experts. And these inhibitors obviously reduce the digestibility of the protein, and that's why we actually heat soybeans in the process to reduce those trypsin inhibitors, so the soybean meal is digestible to the animal. And not all origins are the same. Certainly, this changes from one origin to the other, and it changes from one quarter to the other. In this particular case, let's go ahead and focus on let's go to 2023 and look at those trypsin inhibitors, and you can see how the U.S. stacks up on that. And again, when prices are very expensive, you may have protein, but what's more important is to find out how much of that protein is actually digestible to the animal, right? So you want that lower number of trypsin inhibitor activity, if at all possible. So interesting numbers to look at. And I am sure any of our nutritionists within USAG will be happy to talk to you. Let's talk about soybean quality and moisture. As you well know, we have our good friends at Commodities with a report quality. I'm not going to share all the details with you for the sake of time, but in this particular case, the latest report that we received from them, which was this past week, right, we highlight a significant increase on the moisture in Brazil. And again, moisture on soybeans at harvest is very common. But I think this gap is very important to monitor as people shift from one origin to the other, right? You got to make sure you account for all the factors, including moisture content of the soybeans. Again, if you're a crusher and you have a significant spread in moisture from one origin to the other, just make sure you're not paying for the water, or at least you account that within your price calculations, right? This quality report is available. If you want to pause this recording and take a picture of this PDF report, which is available. We also have a live dashboard where you can compare origins between the U.S., Brazil, different ports in Brazil. If you want to compare even Brazil within Brazil, you also have that option within this live dashboard. I highly recommend you take a look at that, because I think it's very valuable and updated information. Again, just to make sure that our customers have all the tools to make the right decision. I hope what was shared with you here was valuable. I appreciate your time. Please give us your feedback so we can continually improve this report. I wish you all a very happy Easter and enjoy your holiday.